Welcome, everyone. It's a delight to have you with us. This is the second webinar with David Bodman in a series that we are calling Living into Teaching the Principles. The first session has already been completed, and that focused on the early years of David's life as he grew up, demonstrated tremendous natural resilience and common sense, became a Christian brother for 30 years, and in that role was a classroom teacher, a special ed teacher, a school administrator, and then in 1996 he began learning the principles from John Wood there in Australia and many other teachers who traveled to Australia during a very rich period of principles history in the country. And then as a clinician, served as director for the Psychology of Mind Resource Center, clinical director, and went on to be a very active trainer for a number of years, traveling out of the country, across the country, and now and then at a conference where I met him many, many years ago, probably to wave at him more than anything. And most recently, he and I have connected through his Principles in Business online newsletter, where he invited me to do a bit of writing for him, which was very generous. And we've enjoyed getting to know each other for the last 2 or 3 years in a much deeper and professional way. And today, this is a special gathering, and it gives us an opportunity to hear what I think is a very timely message. And that is that, and we're calling this session Evolving from the how-dos to just turning up. And by that, David is really going to be focusing on the experience of growing into being a teacher, facilitator, person sharing the principles. And he has a tremendous wisdom about that. I think many of us have traveled. If you're on this call, you've been involved for a long time with the principles. You have keen interest. And the path that facilitators travel is sometimes a lifelong path. And so, David, I welcome you today. If you would take this in whatever direction you would like, it will be a wonderful journey for us. And then for those of you who are participants, and I will say, this is a very globally diverse group. We have people from the US, from Australia, from London, from Canada, and we hope that Dean will be able to join us as he's driving through the Scottish countryside. So, David, please fill us in and take us on a journey.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I must say, Brett, I really appreciate your time, and Kathy, yours. And this opportunity, I suppose, is you never really know what you know, and this is one of these moments. It's evolved. You say you turn 30 and you go into your 40s and you don't realise you've moved into your 40s unless you're really, really age conscious. But now I'm going to have coughing little spurts at times. And for those who don't know, I've got terminal cancer at the moment, and the cancer's gone into the lymph channels into the lungs. So I'm having a bit of trouble talking sometimes, and that's unusual for me. So I'll be having sips of hot water and all sorts of things. Now, as Kathy had, I've been in the school scene for a long time. So the school scene is about content, teaching people about content. It's not about helping them see their own insightful world within them. So the teacher normally has a curriculum, and it has part 1, 1.2, part 4, 5, 7, 10, 15, and then 2, 2.5, so on and so on. So, and you go through the script, and I'm not talking directly to direct instruction, but it is that formulatic way of doing things. You've got content to deliver to your learners. I learned fairly early that I'm an educator, not a teacher. And one of the critical things that I see is that I'm educating myself and the other. And that's within a context of conversation. Now that may sound strange in a classroom setting, but I think it is true in the classroom setting as in the group facilitating session or a individual one-on-one session. It's engaging someone in a conversation. I didn't learn that right from the beginning. I went through the idea of having content. John and I worked many, many hours on curriculums and stuff that we wanted to go through. Helpful?
I think at that period, you know, that was very common for many of us who are learning the principles early on. I can remember working in a particular, happened to be an early childhood setting, where the administrator had her entire staff creating a notebook this thick of all of the content about what was then called health realization that she would use with the complete staff. So what you're describing was very common in schools, but the same thing was happening for some people inside of business, inside of clinics. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Kathy and you and I, and maybe Nikki and maybe Eamon, I'm not sure, and Georgina would remember the 6 concepts. We going way back, and there were 6 concepts we had to go. I can't even remember them now, but you had 6 concepts. One was, I think, the inside out nature of life. I can't remember all the other, but it was very, in those days for me, safe, because I was coming from a school educational system. It was feeling very safe. That's not a good place to be. In fact, you've got to move into what I call your unknown, your place where you're exploring new territory. And putting that into a context of history in Australia, the Blue Mountains, which is at the back of Sydney, was impenetrable. And many said, we don't know what's on the other side and we don't care. We're safe here on this little section of the whatever. Now, there are others who said, no, I'm going to explore. I'm going to find a way forward beyond the limits of this very big mountain range. And it was, you know, sometimes vertical cliffs that they had to face. So it was the what you might call the explorer spirit that actually found a way over the Blue Mountains and got to what is now a tremendously rich farming agricultural, mining, and all the rest of it. But without those explorers going into the unknown, going into that place where we tend to pull back from, and that's the place of true learning. And that's for me, as well as those that I'm having a conversation with. And that was a long, how are you, Dean? A long period of evolution. It took me some years to get to that point where I could just turn up.
You know, David, at that point in my facilitating life, for the first 3 years, even though I was living and understanding the principles, I was afraid to do the actual presenting. And I happened to be on a grant that was quite generous, so I could contract with someone to do the presentations. And that went on for 3 full years. I sat in the back of the room on a chair, knowing, feeling, living, being moved. But that fear and my training was in public speaking, if you can imagine that. So I always had a little rule for myself in the years before I encountered the principles that you teach only what you know, but if you don't know something, you don't teach. And so that kept me from standing up, and it costs a lot of money because I hired presenters.
Yes.
And then at a certain point, without being critical of anyone, there was a moment in time when I was watching the response of a particular group of professionals to the presentation that was going on, and I could see another way to do it, and there were getting to be lots of problems in the room that particular day. And from that moment on, I knew I'm going to be up there the next time. And I chose a group that I had not told that this was my first time to be a speaker, a presenter of the principles.
Yep.
And at the end, because it went very well, I felt confident to reveal to them what I've just said to you. And to a person, they were extremely encouraging. But I saw that pattern of people being fearful as I was teaching them. To this day, I can name a certain administrator who really cares about the principles, wants that shared with the people that she supervises, but is not courageous to stand up and do it. One-on-one, she can do wonderful things with people. So I think what you're talking about is the, you know, that matter of safety has to fall by the wayside in the willingness to step into the unknown. How did you test that?
And like yourself, Kathy, sitting in the back of the room in fear is a learning moment for each of us.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity. Now, we often say, and I've heard Sid say, I am not the hero. Don't follow me. Listen to your own wisdom. Listen within. That's your teacher. Now, we say that, but do we live it is another question. And that's the challenge I think Kathy is just raising, is can we actually step into what looks like fear, but it's a lie. Mm-hmm. It's false. And it's created in our own quality of mind. Now, in that evolution, be gentle with yourself. As you go along, we tend to be hypercritical of ourselves. Oh, I didn't do that right. Or someone says you did that really well, and you say, yes, but da-da-da-da-da-da. Be really, really gentle with yourself. There is no hero other than the one that is within you and who you are. So listen. One of the keys, I think, for me was being able to listen to that quieter, wise voice. It's a whisper compared to the throng of our own thinking. So having the ability to listen to that really quiet voice, and it's not going to intrude, it's going to wait for an invitation. So we've got to invite that into ourselves and in and through ourselves. So be gentle. Brutality brings us nothing but humiliation, lack of confidence, fear, and we're the most critical of all. We don't need anyone outside. So one thing I've really learnt is be really, really compassionate and gentle to yourself. From the first series, you know that I had, school was just humiliation every day. There was no joy in it at all. So I learned how to be critical, humiliated, fearful, but it's a journey that we all can move to a deeper sense of who we really are. And when we see who we really are, that's still just a figment of our imagination. There's more to be seen. There's a deeper knowing. So as you go through your journey, or as I go through my journey as a facilitator, coach, whatever, it's important that you look after yourself, gentle yourself. There's nothing really to teach. There's everything to share in a conversation that is rich and deep in listening to both what I call the inside and the outside. So when you're listening to yourself, you've got a much more powerful way of listening to the other or the group. So it's really, really important to learn or be open to a new way of listening. Listening that is non-judgmental, non-opinionated, non-directional. What I mean by that is you're not trying to direct them to a particular point. You're just expressing what you're seeing. There's a big difference between an observation and what I call a judgment. When you observe something, it's like observing the sunrise or the sunset. You just see it unfold. Or you see the person unfold. Such a beautiful way of seeing people unfold and seeing beyond their symptoms and pathology, and actually seeing the beauty of the human being. Kathy, have you got any other thoughts that I might want to share in because I think that sort of captures the kernel of the...
I think, you know, what was happening for me as I was listening to you, I was just so deeply touched by the special words that you personally use to talk about this. You talk about the hero within, and you talk about observation as we would appreciate a sunrise. It's the beauty of your words that's touching me. And the fact that they are your words. I don't read these words in other publications about the principles. They're not inconsistent by any means. But you're describing the experience of encountering another human being at their best, maybe before they do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
if I may break in there,
please.
It is holding their best selves for them, so that they can see it for themselves.
Yeah.
And that's really another path, another want of a better job, or another aspect of any facilitation coach role, is holding their best so that they can see it more and more.
And there is no way that we can intellectually plan that out.
No.
But I also find it true and humorous and common that so many of us, when we are ready to do the first of the presentations that we do with the principles, that there's this huge tendency to put a tremendous form to it. At least for me, it was a crutch in the beginning. It was all true things that would be beneficial to people. What happened to you? How did you transition from being that content focus to just turning up?
Haven't got a clue. I think one of the keys is speaking from your experience rather than talking beyond your experience. Mm-hmm. For example, I can now talk about, with some freedom, end of life. I have an experience of terminal cancer, and hence I can talk about that from an experience. Mm-hmm. And not only that, from a quality of mind that can waver or not. And I feel a freedom to do that. And I have also the freedom to talk about a movement from humiliation to sort of being comfortable in your own skin. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And knowing that. And I often say, you can believe in it, but you've got to know it. And I mean know it in the true sense of the word. It's embodied in you.
Yeah, and Sid would use the word fact for that
Yes,
at times.
yes, it's a fact.
You'd say a spiritual fact, or and I didn't really read or have access to the resources where he was using that word until rather recently. But on my own, when we were trying to solve the first encounters that people in my trainings were having with the principles, the word mind was very difficult for public school educators, as an example, because they were, had been told you can't talk about things religious. Well, spiritual is different, but we ended up landing on the word knowing, that, mind gives you the power of knowing, or you have that. And now I'm really kind of dumbfounded that I see that at some point Sid is saying, let me explain what spiritual is. And he talks about the fact, and he said it's a knowing versus a believing, which I have been taught the difference between those and the value of knowing by Roger Mills years and years and years ago. But the common sense to deviate from the word mind, because I wasn't reaching, the folks in the training years ago, I always thought, well, that's maybe not quite right, but I knew it fit the group. So that freedom to just come from what you have experienced and try to find words that transmit that to another person so they can really understand it. I noticed that Dean is with us in and out from Scotland, I think. So if we can tell that he's there at a certain point, I will ask Dean to speak up a little bit, because on this point, he really has had some pretty good experiences. Dean, are you able to hear us at the moment? I think he's not.
I'd like to just go back to I think a critical learning for me is it's not about words. Yeah. It's about the feeling in which they are conveyed. And mind, spirituality, spirits, all those things can get so complicated in a overthought world. See, I think we're all basically religious, but I don't want to give a thesis on that. I just know there is a level of spirituality, and I don't care. I'll throw out, religion or religious spirituality. I have for mind life. Life can never be confused, I don't think, in people's life. They know it goes on after death and before birth. Life is. And that's why I use life rather than mind. It's so palpable to everyone. It reaches everybody. So live life to the full. And I had a little caption way back when I started teaching, choose life. That was my little, I put it under my, I had a stamp, Brother David Bodman, and choose life underneath. And it comes from the Bible, of course, but it's when Moses was taking the people into the promised land. And God said, choose life, not death. And you've got to remember, Moses never went into the promised land. So it was it was a touching moment. I remember it well. I was in chapel meditating on that little scripture piece, and it captured me. So it doesn't matter how you get the info, through Bibles, through conversations reading, podcasts, television programs. When you hear the truth, it sticks. You know it's the truth. You know it's right there in your whole being.
Yeah.
So, yeah. How are we going for time?
We're doing just fine. We have about an hour if we use the full time, and I will invite people who are listening in to begin to raise your hands and ask questions. And if you, I may call on you at some point too, but of all the things that David has said, maybe what has touched you or brought you a new thought this morning? And I'll just, yes, please.
Georgina.
Georgina, you are on.
Thank you, David, for sharing that. I've just been writing words as you've been speaking that have really struck me. And the first word that I wrote was conversation. And then you've moved through some things, and then you were talking about when you're facilitating a group that you're actually listening to yourself. And I think you said something, and that enables you to listen better to the other. What came to me when you said that was that when we are listening to ourselves in the midst of others, we are all listening to the same conversation. And earlier I had the question cross my mind, so who's having the conversation? But I won't go into that. But it just really struck me that when we are facilitating or in a group like this or wherever, that if we're listening to the stuff that sticks, right, then we're listening to something beyond ourselves. And we're also listening to that in other people. So we're all listening to the same thing. The conversation is one at a deeper level beyond you and me or anybody else as human beings. That's what I heard.
Yep, I would. It is. Yeah. You summed it up nicely.
You know how we often talk about listen to the feeling in the room? When, it becomes extremely quiet, people are in fact visibly connected, touched by what's occurring. Georgina, I think you described that moment in training really well. And we even see that on recorded webinars, and I'm thinking of some things that Brett just did this last week, where there would be just kind of a group aha. And that's where we move into that unknown that we're hoping to touch. Maybe you can call it that magical place where everyone is well and well-meaning. It's lovely. Thank you, Georgina.
Thank you.
Others? Janelle, could I ask you, what are you hearing or thinking as you join us today? And I'm so delighted you're here.
Welcome. Thanks for inviting me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I see some parallels between what I've been discovering with my own kind of journey through this. When I first started working as a trainer, I worked with a set curriculum, and I would use set questions, and I knew what the answer was supposed to be. And even before I came across principles, I began to see that there was an evolution in my training where I would you know, I kind of knew to ask other questions, and when someone answered a question, to kind of explore it a little bit further, realizing that you don't necessarily understand what they're saying, and you can't make the assumption that you know. So then when I came across the principles and, you know, kind of had the journey of beginning to facilitate and really wanting to have a set curriculum, to have a set and everyone telling me I'm not supposed to, but really wanting to. And I know the first couple of times I did my workshops out at the homeless shelter that I've been doing on a weekly basis, the first time I really resisted having anything written down or you know, kind of pre-planned, but I did have a list in my head of what I wanted to go through. You know, okay, I want to introduce, I want to, you know, ask them this, I want to, and, you know, despite that, it was still interesting. I mean, people still heard things, and you could see a difference in people's responses where they would get busier with their thinking or quieter with their thinking. You know, so I could still see those things, but I definitely see a difference now where I'm going into those discussions with really nothing on it at all, and no plan for what I'm going to see or what I'm going to hear or where it's going to go. And I see a deeper response with the participants because of that. So yeah, so that's just kind of, I see some parallels, you know, in what you're sharing and what I've kind of gone through in my own evolution.
And could I ask you, how long have you been working with the principles, and what was the source of your early training in the principles?
Well, when I first came across the principles, it was from the Three Principles movie site. And it was just because I'd heard about it in a blog, and I was curious who the Pranskys were. And I Googled the Pranskys and came across that site. And within about an hour of watching the videos, I had a profound spiritual awakening, and it lasted for 3 days. I call it my Eckhart Tolle moment. And I just saw through the illusion of everything that I had experienced in my life. I saw that everyone was living an illusion with their thinking. I saw that, you know, everything that drives us is our belief in our insecurities, whether it's driving for success or being afraid of doing things, everything, you know, all the addictions that we have are just trying to feel better because of the bad feeling that's in our head, and we don't know, you know. So I saw things really clearly and simply, and I experienced a level of unconditional love that I'd never experienced before in my life. So I knew what love was before, and I'd had it in all sorts of relationships, but I'd never experienced this before. It was beyond anything, and it was universal. And so when I had kind of had this experience and then wanted to gobble up everything about the Three Principles, and I knew at that point that I didn't really have an option to share this now, because it just didn't make any sense to me to train what I was training on before. I would train steps and procedures and models and methods, and now it just occurred to me, well, people can do just fine if they get access to their own wisdom. They'll know what to do. And so that's kind of how I came across the principles. And then from there, because I'd worked as a corporate trainer for 20 years or so, from there, I just knew that I had to find a way to share this in some way. And so I just gobbled up everything I could get my hands on. So I went to the 3PGC conference that September of that year. Mm-hmm. That was in 2013. I went to the 3P school on Salt Spring Island in November. Then I joined Super Coach Academy and did that in 2014. And of course, with that program, you get access to all the longtime practitioners. And, you know, they're sharing all their wisdom. So that was great. I've done some stuff with the Pranskys and yeah, just all sorts of stuff. I've been to the conference in London for Tikkun and yeah.
So you took a deep dive.
Yeah, like, you know, it's...
No, Kathy, I think she's very greedy.
Oh.
She's been gobbling up all this stuff. I don't know.
You know, it's so funny because my husband keeps on reminding me that I don't need to do any of this because I already saw so much with my initial insight. And I know he's right. But I still can't stop myself from doing it.
Thank God you've got a weakness.
Yeah.
Thank God you've got a weakness.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that your first point of contact was actually on the internet.
Yeah, well, that's the most ridiculous thing is that literally I watched 3 videos of George, 3 videos of Linda, 1 of Roger Mills, 1 of Sydney Banks, and then I got to the one with Jack Pransky, and he said, in the moment he said, how can we take ourselves seriously in the light of the fact that we're making it up? I realized the immense truth of that in the moment, and it was like all of my thinking for my entire life just completely dropped away and time slowed down, and I realized, oh my God, every single thought I've ever had in my entire life has been completely made up, and oh my God, everybody else in the world is experiencing the same thing in the same way. And it just, everything was just so clear. This is the source of all wars. This is the source of all conflict. This is the source of all the problems that we have in life. And
also the source of all love, compassion,
yeah.
joy, peace. And we forget that sometimes.
Yeah.
The critical nature of our inner self is all that. Love,
Yeah.
compassion,
Yeah.
joy.
Yeah, and that was the other wonderful thing about it that even made it that much more profound for me, was that deep feeling of I know when I say unconditional to people, I know they don't see what I'm trying to say. You know, there's parents that talk about having unconditional love for their children, and I know they don't have unconditional love for their children. And so yeah, just that being able to see that deeper feeling of it. And yeah, it was, I'm very, very fortunate, very lucky to have been able to see that.
Thank you so much for being with us today. She has a marvelous website.
You're welcome, Kathy.
That just catalogs all kinds of resources. When I need to check something on my own, I'll go and take a look at hers. So thanks for joining us today. David, is there anything more that occurs to you at the moment? If not, I'm getting ready to think of a couple other people here to call on.
If I may, just a couple of observations.
Yes.
And one being, one of the things about Janelle's story in that sense is that we can get so caught up with the intellectual side of things, and we consume all the stuff via our intellect. And I did that for many, many years. Many years, 10 years. But the critical thing is the truth within yourself and allowing that to grow more and more, and gentle that along. The second thing that I've noticed is the area of it's really hard. I was with a person quite a number of months ago that I have a reaction to. Mm-hmm. And I cannot not have that reaction because I can't see what I can't see. So I'm having this reaction, and I'm getting very judgmental, and I feel like I want to argue, so I keep quiet. All that sort of, and it's all in my feeling, but I can't see that it's thought, but it is in my feeling, and I own it. Yeah, you know, I own that. I've got a quality of mind that is judgmental towards this person that creates in me a stiffness, judgmentalism, an enemy of this person. And I think that's another learning that I'm finding, that I got to hold that lightly. It's not about being human, it's about more learning, being open to more understanding, because we've got a lot to learn. It's infinite. And that's about it. Thanks, Kathy.
Well,
I noticed, did I see Naaman put up his hand? I'm not sure.
In a moment, yes, I will. You said a mouthful when you talked about spending all of those years in the beginning amassing intellectual resources, because you truly were doing that physically with the Psychology of Mind Resource Center. And in one sense, and I sit looking at a wall of books as I'm recording this with you today, that collection of physical resources, in a sense, can be a safety. It's a source of learning. It can be a safety. But when you talk about the real internal learning for yourself that allows you to be able to say, I am experiencing stiffness. I'm making this other person an enemy. I mean, it doesn't get much more honest than that of me with myself. And I think it's an important statement that you're making. I'm wondering, Ankush, if you might be willing, as you listen to David, to share what has been happening for you as a coach with a very growing business. What do you see that seems to fit or complement or relate to the kinds of things that David has been speaking about?
Well, firstly, I want to say, David and Kathy, thank you for having me on this webinar, and I'm kind of sitting here so touched, and I really feel where you're coming from, and it's, you know, it's yeah, I'm unusually struggling for words, but I'm going to do my best. I'm really hopeful, and as Kathy knows, I really come from a coaching background, which I feel is quite different in many ways than the original principles went out in the kind of mental health field. And what I see is how the principles have started to transform that field of counseling, psychology, therapy, that there's this whole other field now of coaching, which is a huge and growing field in its own right, but different. There are distinctions, and the principles can completely transform that field also. And everything that you've been saying, David, is so applicable to coaching, because whether someone is coming in my opinion, to learn about, you know, better mental health, or whether they're coming to a coach because they want to achieve a goal or get over a problem. They don't really care what we do. They just want to be helped. And I can't think of anything that is more transformative than the three principles. And, you know, as you were talking before about, you know, just going out and sharing, and, you know, I give myself permission. I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I kind of give myself permission to just go and do the best that I can do. Because what I've seen is, like, the very first client that I had, which was after learning about the principles for 3 days, when I really knew nothing, she got really helped by my very, very, very little understanding of the principles. And I've gone from very, very little understanding to just very little understanding of the principles. And there's so much more for me to learn. And yet I know that my very basic, whatever little I know, still with my ego, still with everything else, is helpful to people. And I've started to see people change incredibly. And so it's not about, and I hear you say this, it's not about us as practitioners, facilitators, teachers, or coaches, because what we're working with, the knowledge and the direction we're pointing to, is just so powerful.
And if I may break in for a moment on that, I can remember way back when I was doing it in the late 90s, I met a person about 3 years ago, and she said, "You changed my life." And I didn't know that, number one. Number two, we don't know what our influence will ever be. And number three, with the little we know, we can touch people's lives. Now, we may feel incompetent, but with the little we, you know, come from that truth, it will have, it will touch people's lives. So we don't need to be an expert. We just need to be really grounded every day, as much as we can every day.
That focus on the daily grounding, I think, is important. And so often I've seen people be frightened if on Monday they seem to be doing really well and by Tuesday they've fallen off. And worse yet, I've seen administrators watch their employees, and as that falling off happened on Tuesday, the administrator, who does not necessarily have the understanding, becomes judgmental of the whole of the teaching. Have you ever run into that? Yeah. I just think the understanding comes and goes, and your focus on take care of myself today, watch where I'm at, makes a lot of difference. And I'm wondering who might have a comment or a question that you might like to pose. All right. You are unmuted. Please proceed. Iman.
You're on, Eamon.
Me?
We can hear you, Eamon.
Okay, lovely. Right. Speaking from personal experience, and not been very good at this kind of thing. This is the first one of these I was ever asked or ever took part in, so it's a bit hard to articulate everything that I want to try to say. And David has said the most of it anyway. An awful lot has to do with the quality of feeling that you have when you're talking to people, and that you convey when you're talking to people. It's quite you can say things that have a huge effect on people that you don't even realize you've said. I remember one time talking to a chap who was at war with his ex-wife over custody of the child, and we were fighting over who was going to have it on Christmas Day. And I said something, and I don't know what I said, but the war finished, it dissipated, it came to an arrangement, it came to some agreement or other. And the guy afterwards was talking to a brother of mine, and he said, "You know that brother, you're a very smart fella." He says, "You know, he solved this problem, you know, he said something." And my brother says, "Well, what did he say?" Well, I don't know what he said, but it wasn't what I said, it was the feeling with which I said it that triggered something in the person that made him step back from a position that he was holding dearly. And I see that in everyday life. I see people who just seem to have fallen out of love with life for life's sake. They're lost in a world of their own, in a world of self-obsession, in a world of addiction, in a world of I must come first or whatever. And there's really only one center in the universe, and that's themselves. And I was in that place at one time, and over the years, I've been knowing David for 16 years now, I have noticed in myself that as I became more aware of the inside-out nature of life, just to use that line, how much more expansive my world has become, how much more I notice other people, and one thing that they were talking about there a minute ago is when he's in a company with somebody with whom he has judgment around. And I've been in that situation, and I've been in situations where, you know, I see people that are frenetic around me and everything. And it's really important to try bringing it all back home to yourself. And but not alone do you bring it home to yourself. It's not enough to bring it home to yourself. But then once you've done that, you actually have to, and you will, if your understanding is half reasonable, you will actually hold it gently. You'll go gentle on yourself. So there's this awareness that it's not just enough to bring it home to yourself, but you actually have to, I'm doing the best I can in this situation, and you kind of leave it at that. Don't be judgmental either on anybody else or upon yourself. And that way there's a good chance that life will take care of things. It'll be okay. You have to have faith that life will take care of things, that you don't have to manage everything, you know? And that's about it from me, I think, at this moment in time. Thank you.
Those are very significant comments. David, if I can ask you, to respond a bit in the context of your present situation. You know, he's talking about if we can be at ease in the moment, if we can be trusting that the course of life unfolds as it needs to. It's a very delicate question. Given that you have told us you're dealing with terminal cancer, what has actually been most important or helpful about your own lived understanding of the principles that sustains you in the moments that are actually most difficult, if I can be so bold as to ask?
Well, can I just go back to Eamon and some comments he made, and then I'll go to what you're leading to.
Thank you.
I'm just made, first time I've ever made notes during a webinar. First and foremost, remember I went like that, and it was about managers or owners of companies, and they get frightened because it hasn't worked the first time, it hasn't worked the second time, and it doesn't look like it's working. I have a client this morning talking about, and I've worked with them for 10 years, and they are in that, oh my God, we're fracturing. And I want to speak to the boss tomorrow and say, I'm coming over on Tuesday. No, you've got it. And we'll put aside half a day or the day, and I'm going to do some coaching with you guys. In situ and live. So that if I get paid for it, good on. If I don't, bad luck. So the thing is, and going back to what I said earlier, we've got to hold their best selves while they are getting to that point where they realise it themselves. We've really got to hold that. Sometimes they get really nervous, they get anxious, they get unsettled, fearful, and we've got to hold that for them. And as Eamon beautifully put, life will look after itself in you, in us, in the company. It will look after us. But there's a level of openness that we've got to have for it to enable that to happen. And the third thing that I wanted to go to, and we often talk about, is innocence. We've really got to appreciate how innocently we go into all sorts of madnesses, craziness, and we do it innocently. Like I said with this guy, I just can't get it beyond my head. I know it's in my mind, but my feelings are telling me a whole heap of stuff. And it's telling me, actually, there is a lie going on in my consciousness. And secondly, I've got to hold that innocently. I'm just doing the best I can with the crap that's going on in my head. Yep.
I'm going to let you continue, and then I'll come back to this.
Okay. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going down the path that you wanted me to do, and that is, with terminal cancer, I'm rather pragmatic. And for others, it's disturbing. Now, Anne will testify to this. When she was in hospital, I was in hospital in 2014, had a what they call a Whipple's procedure, which is taking half the stomach, pancreas, and some of the duodenum out around the growth area with the hope that it will not return. Well, unfortunately returned last year, and hence chemotherapy and all the rest of it. But what was interesting, I had a 4 months in hospital. It was horrific. I mean, horrific. Vomiting, diarrhea, lost 17 kilos, couldn't get out of bed. Couldn't get out of bed in the quite a number of times. It was just horrific. But it was the 5th week that got me transformed to a new way of considering something. Why the 5th week? It documented you should be over the Whipple's procedure in 4 weeks. And I was far from that. I was absolutely devastated. And I realized the power of an expectation. I realized, wow, how a thought like you'll be out of hospital in 4 weeks, how powerful that moment was. That was the lie. That was the innocence that I didn't see until that moment. And from that point on, I made the hospital moments a retreat. It was a time to just experience life moment to moment as it unfolds. If I'm sick, I'm sick. I used to have a needle phobia. Now, stick me with whatever you like. I learned so much in that moment of realizing an expectation and really it's a thought, has such power to make me miserable. Mm-hmm. And it's also got that same power to make me powerfully happy in no matter what circumstance. That was the moment. And I have a choice.
You went to the exact point that I was going to ask you to address. You talked about the 5th week and the misery you had been keeping yourself in. And I'm going to use the word innocently here. But what you're really saying is that you were doing the best you could.
Absolutely.
And you had forgotten that this too is caused by thinking.
Yep.
And when the insight broke through, you were at another level, another quality of life.
Well, I would call it a no turn back area.
A no turn back area.
No turn back. It's like flat Earth. You go to round Earth. You can't go back to flat Earth thinking. And this moment is, I may or may not die in a few months. But what I want is this seminar, I'm feeling good. I'm enjoying it, connected. That's what I want. There's nothing else I want. Mm-hmm. I've had tea and I've got my drink and I'm engaged and loving what people have been saying and exploring. Mm-hmm. So I'm really here. And that's what I would like to do, is to turn up every day, every moment, no matter what the circumstance. I can be really, really, really sick. Like a few weeks ago, I had a bit of a crampy little thought. I've been noticing my health going from here, going off the screen. I can't even walk to the shop any longer. I used to love going every day to the shop. Not to shop, but to just get exercise and be out in the outdoors. And it's not there any longer. Well, I can go to the front door and I can get out into the roses and I can get out into the backyard and I can do those sorts of things. I can go over to the neighbour and occasionally I can walk to the shop and I will. So it's not only about the horrible things. There are sometimes horrible moments. but they are very, very, very infrequent when you've got your rudder directed towards living life to the full.
Yeah. Mary, could I ask you to respond? I've been watching.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll do my best. I'm a little tired today. You know, David, I haven't met you, I don't believe, but I just want to say that, you know, everything you've said is so beautiful and so right on, and I just feel honored to be a part of this today. You know, yesterday actually I was walking along and I made some notes because I was having I had a little, not an insight really, but a sort of a seeing further into something that I think fits in with what we're talking about, and I'll try to articulate it. You know, because I work with a lot of people in mental health, and some of them get touched really quickly about this, and then it's just like, okay, we're good to go, and we just continue on and deepen until they feel like they don't need to anymore. And it's a blast. And then there's some people that have a real difficulty hearing, or even if they have heard, you know, well, yeah, a difficulty hearing. And I was thinking about that as I was going for a walk with my dog yesterday. And I was also thinking about even after we have an understanding of this, and it brings us to a new level of living. I mean, for me, it was very, you know, I did the 180 right off the bat, and life has never looked the same. And it's been an ever deepening of that for 22 years. But yet there's times when I look back in my life and I've had lots of learning curves, like with different aspects of life, like relationships or career things, or there's always going to be these stuck spots that we get in. Where there's going to be, like I'm working with a few people now that are really having trouble with a broken relationship, and they just can't get out of the thinking of it. They're suffering. There's going to be these challenges that we face in life. And, you know, even for a person that has, like, as I was thinking about myself, and I thought, well, you know, there's times when I feel like I'm really stuck, and yet I have an understanding of this. What is that? And then it occurred to me, I thought, you know, it's really that it's perfectly fine. And it's that we're going to get there. We're going to be stuck sometimes. And that's all right, because that part of us, that deeper part that you're pointing to today, is evolving anyway. In spite of us. It's always evolving. And so I think it just dawned on me yesterday, because I thought, oh, this is what I can share with one of my clients, because an understanding of the principles or what they're pointing to, I think gives us that, that's the, I don't know how to say it, the leg up, so to speak, where even if you do get stuck, you know, okay, that's all right. It's easier to hang out in the stuck spot and be wherever you're at, because you know that you're going to reach a new level of understanding eventually. That's going to come. You don't know when, and you can't make it happen. You can't, but it's going to happen. And so I think that's one of the most beautiful things that I've so grateful for, is knowing, because going in and out of thinking, in and out of challenges, in and out of stuck spots, in and out of thinking, do I really know anything about this at all? Some days. And then remembering, oh yeah, that's you're making that up. That's the lie, as you were putting it, or just your personal thinking. But that deeper part of us is continuing to evolve and will show itself. And that's always true. There is no exception to that. So that's what I wanted to share. I hope that made some sense.
Absolutely. Well, it did to me.
Good.
You know what strikes me, as Mary was talking about that deeper part of ourselves, wisdom, mind, just keeps evolving. And I think about that in each person's life. First of all, that's a miracle. And secondly, it helps me to know, as I sit here in Minnesota and David is off in Australia, to know that that deeper part of David, of each one of us in this call, will keep rolling on. And we're okay. David is okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, what a gift.
I'd like to just go back to a little bit of what Mary said about she was walking her dog and thinking about. What I'm finding more and more, it's not actually, for me, it's not actually the thinking, it's deepening into the silence. It's beyond my cogitations, reflections. It's when I've gone past all that and I get touched by the silence, that inner silence. There's a beautiful book by Joel Goldsmith, The Thunder of Silence. And it's at that silence, the voice is so loud, but so gentle and so true. So I find people they don't know the distinction between that deep silence and quiet analysing or thinking over things or going to reflection, and then this beautiful deep connection to the silence. Often I say in my groups, silence is okay. When we ask for any comment, silence is okay. I invite it in because it speaks louder than we could ever put to words. And the other, I can't remember, I think it was you, Mary, that used the word miracle. And thought is a miracle. Consciousness is a miracle.
Yeah.
Mind is a miracle. And their coalescence together is a miracle. Just, I get breathless sometimes when it shows up in my life. It just, wow. Or it shows up in others. You know, they'll have a barney absolutely gone off their head, and I just stand back in awe at that ability to go off your head. To so get lost in your personal reality. And at the same time, they come back. Another miracle. And I suppose that the last thing I would want to say about it here is how many times people say, I know what you're saying. They don't. They haven't got a clue. But then, yeah, I know it's my thinking, I know, but you don't. If you did, there would be a moment of realization.
Yeah.
So be almost humble to your own innocent crap.
I'm really at a loss for words. Forgive me for saying. I guess I'm just experiencing one of those moments where I'm pretty quiet.
Yes. The silence that David talks about is what we long for. And when we understand that we get in our own way of that, it's a profound change in our lives. There's
yes. On one hand, I see that. I'm tempted to say, on the same hand, there's also a sense of the intelligence that can come through.
yes.
Even when we are not in silence. I mean, sure, the silence seems to be the place where it seems to facilitate that more often. But at the same time, we've seen examples of people who have been in low moment, and then suddenly there was a breakthrough that happened out of nowhere.
Absolutely.
So I don't want to make silence into a wonderful thing or a thing, if you will, but it is a profound place to be, because I'm guessing it's one of our defaults, that knowing that is available to us any time, even when we can't see it, is quite, I'm afraid to use the word hope, but it's more like a knowing that it's here within us, and that it could happen within seconds, minutes, hours, days, whenever. Because recently I went through a period of almost 2 weeks of without making it personal, I was going through something, and I was in a place where I didn't want to be. I wasn't liking the feeling I was having, but somehow over the last couple of days, the peace started to come through again. And yet, out of that peace, I began to see what was happening in the past 2 weeks that I could never see in that time.
In many ways, that's a story that is like David talking about being in that hospital for 4 weeks and having a horrendous experience. And then there's a moment where one sees something new. David, I saw you nodding your head. Is there a comment you'd like to make?
Just one. There are transformative moments that we consciously it doesn't come to mind consciously. We just experience a new way of being in the world. And all we need to do is celebrate that. We don't need to work it out cognitively or what changed. It's just enjoy the feeling, this movement. Many, many times over my life, as I said before, the principles, I had these evolving moments, and the principles were at work in me before I got to know their names, because they are fundamental to all human experience. So it's so important to understand that it's not only in the deep moments of silence, but it's in this, somehow this judgment's gone, or how I be in the world is gone, and I'm feeling better around this person or this event or life in general. It's sort of invisibly transforms your life.
David, that's a beautiful place to be drawing our discussion today to a close. I would invite you, David, if you had one wish for all of us who carry on with this work with the principles, what would that be?
Love life.
Love life.
As soon as you start loving life, you have become the principles. And you may share them, or I think you share them by your relationships. And all the relationships, and they can be temporary. The person that you meet on the train, 15 seconds, and I remember an old lady, or not so old, but she had 3 bags. And I could see that she was going to have difficulty getting off the train. So I said, I'll take your bags. She can carry one and I'll take the rest. The relief on her face. Now that was a moment for her. And for me. Fancy being in the state of mind or a quality of mind that I could be generous. That I could see someone else's plight and free enough to offer. There we are.